This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Evidence of the pre-flood watchers on the oldest religious settlement on Earth, and you can see it with us this fall. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Whether you're watching us tonight on YouTube, and if so, appreciate you just subscribing and sharing that link around, or our brand new mobile app. Yes, we have a new mobile app from Gilbert House. It's available on iOS devices right now, available for Apple TV as well, and soon to be on Android and Amazon Kindle Fire tablets too. We'll tell you more about the app before the end of the program tonight, but first want to dive right into an interview, actually two interviews conducted recently with our guest who has put together a tour for Sharon and me and a select group that will be brave enough to join us on this adventure in October 18th through November 3rd. This is our tour of Turkey. Why Turkey? Well, you'll find out over the course of the next 45 minutes or so as we discuss some of the locations that we will see. Got some video to show you as well, and hope you can join us. Consider joining us this fall. Details on where to sign up or to find out more if you're just interested and curious about whether this is something you might want to do during the program here. We sat down with our guest a few weeks back and recorded these programs. He is the founder of Ezra Adventures, and he's also a best-selling author, and that's how we actually got to meet him. He is the author of two coffee table books, most recently Jerusalem Rising, the best-selling Israel Rising, the first one, and we'll tell you how to get a copy of Israel Rising at a real good deal, too, during the course of our conversation with Doug Hershey.
Hey, man, it's good to see you again. It's good to be on.
Yeah, it was October of 2019. I had to look it up. But we hit it off when you came on Skywatch TV to talk about Israel Rising, and we discovered a mutual love for archaeology. It's just that I've not been out to actually see those sites as often as you have been. And, just a couple of months ago, as Sharon and I were talking about, when are we going to be able to travel again? When will the travel restrictions be lifted? And I noticed that you were in Turkey, checked and found that Turkey is not as restrictive now. And thankfully, these restrictions seem to be lifting just about everywhere anyway. But you were leading groups to Turkey. So we got in touch, and thus the Skywatch TV tour of Turkey was born.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about it. I mean, much of COVID, as many of your viewers I'm sure know, that when Israel kind of shut down through COVID, Turkey remained wide open. And so, really what you find is that the way that you would go to Israel to experience the biblical sites of like the Gospels or through the Psalms or some of the kings and the events in Israel, Turkey really holds most of Turkey and Greece, really, but primarily Turkey holds a lot of the of New Testament locations. And so the same way that you'd go to Israel to see your Bible come alive and to kind of walk in the footsteps of Jesus, here you are seeing the places where, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, a little bit more even in this program, see these places where the Lord sent his disciples out from like sheep among wolves. And so for any of your viewers that have been to Israel, then taking that next step and seeing exactly where these disciples, these Galilean fishermen, or these sort of backwater guys into some of these cities is just phenomenal. And so I'm really excited to get your group there.
And it even kind of bookends a little bit when you think about it, because Abraham was called from Kasdim in Hebrew, and it's only been the last 100 years or so that scholars have connected of the Chaldeans in southeast Iraq with Abraham. But prior to that, it was assumed, and I think the evidence in the Bible suggests this, that Abraham actually came from the area around Haran in southeastern Turkey.
Yeah, and up in that same region. I mean, I was just there in Turkey within the last year, up in the sort of the upper end of Mesopotamia and in Haran and some of these locations, just to check it out for groups like yours. And there's not biblical sites or biblical buildings from 4,000 years ago, but you see the landscape, you see the plains of Haran as the scriptures talk about, and you can see why it was such a fertile land. And so there'll be some of these really unique places that we'll be going to, which I'm very excited about.
Now, of course, in the New Testament, Paul and his colleagues did a lot of church planting in Asia, and then John was inspired by the Holy Spirit in the book of Revelation to write letters, and they were all directed to churches in Western Asia Minor, Anatolia, what is now modern-day Turkey. this is something, since Sharon and I started this program now over 2 years ago, as we dug into the history of those 7 cities, we found that there's a lot more there. There were specific reasons that specific things were written to those churches. The church at Ephesus, for example, we remember from Paul's experience there with the silversmiths who were upset that he was cutting into their business by leading people away from the veneration of the great goddess Artemis, who the Romans called Diana. What is really striking about what remains in Ephesus?
Ephesus is an amazing, amazing city. You know, I explained it to friends, again, that have been to Israel. If you've been to Caesarea in Israel, you know, Caesarea Maritime, you know, our guides would talk about how Herod didn't really want to go to Caesarea because it was sort of this backwater town that he had to build up. But yet it's one of the largest in Israel. If you're familiar with how large that site, Ephesus is 3-4 times that size. I mean, it is just a massive, massive city. And you know, and in the book of Ephesians, as they're writing, because of, you know, in the same way that, you know, if you're on the Mount of Beatitudes and you're talking about the Sermon on the Mount, there are specific things that Jesus is talking about from that location, and it's the exact same way when Paul's writing a letter to the Ephesians. There are specific things that he's referring to in the city, in the culture, in the environment. Really, Ephesus was a bit of a spiritual Disneyland of sorts, where just anything and everything went as far as gods and sacrifices, and so what a profound place to really become his home base for several years, for sure, for, you know, a lot of the apostles and a lot of the sort of the sending out locations from Ephesus, and so it's just such a rich city. I mean, we could really spend a day or two there, I'm sure, with the time of our trip. We won't be able to, but there's just such biblical richness there. Yeah, and
this was the first city to which Jesus dictated a letter. It was really intriguing reference in Revelation 2, verse 6. You hate the works of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. And scholars have wondered for 2,000 years exactly who were the Nicolaitans, and I'm sure during the tour we will talk about that, as we'll be doing a lot of teaching as we go through this. But of course, Ephesians 6, one of the most famous chapters, the teaching on the whole armor of God, which Sharon has done, is really powerful in and of itself. But to be able to write that and to be able to review that right there at the location of the church where John was receiving this message that he was to dictate for the church at Ephesus, that'll raise the hair on the back of your neck.
Again, it's if you're connecting it to any experiences in Israel, just being on location where some of these things were spoken is really profound. And to me, because the letters to these 7 churches in Revelation are coming from the Lord to those locations, while John is the one writing it, it's really coming from the heart of the Lord. So there are specific things, and like whether we're in Ephesus or Pergamum or Sardis or, you know, wherever we're at, we'll be able to tie that into very similar things that when Jesus is talking to the disciples or talking to the Pharisees, he uses the same type of language. His heart is coming out. He's expressing things that are very similar to, you know, in places like on the Sermon on the Mount, saying a lot of a similar type of thing, but exactly what you're saying, speaking into the culture of the cities, speaking into the culture of the people. And primarily, these are locations where, you know, when Paul would travel, that had a really profound Jewish community. So there's a strong Jewish element that underlies all of those letters, as well as how he's communicating these sort of Torah concepts to the new believers living in these cultures.
The Church of Laodicea gets a bad rap. It's probably the most infamous of the 7 churches of Revelation. But the city of Pergamum, you mentioned, is singled out for a couple of specific sins that Jesus notes. There are some who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak, who was the king of Moab, to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel, suggesting a sexual sin of sorts there. But he also said, I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is.
Yeah.
What's that a reference to?
It comes back to something that was built. Oh man, I'm going blank on the date, but it was an altar to the god of Zeus, and it was something that throughout history was kind of taken and removed around. But what's significant about that, as we're talking about the Jewish influence and how it all kind of comes back to the Jewish people. A German archaeologist in the late 1900s begins kind of excavating that area and starts moving some of these things back to Berlin, and they open what's called the Pergamum Museum, and they rebuild the actual throne of Satan in Germany. And that first opens in 1930, that then catches the eyes of a very young Adolf Hitler, which of course we know that connection into the Jewish into the Jewish world for sure. But here we are again, God speaking, the Lord himself speaking to the believers in Pergamum, directly talking about the throne of Satan. So when we're talking about again, sort of how biblical connections are coming alive in our world, and what is the connection, or was that long ago, or how does it influence today? Pergamum is a tremendous site. At one point, it was like the location in Asia to be at. I mean, we could probably spend 2 or 3 days just in that city. There's an amphitheater that holds 25,000 people. It's an amazing location. But there's also this spot that was called the Throne of Satan, which not only influenced the world in those early days as John is writing to the area, but even today, finding that coincidentally that same thing was then moved to Berlin, and now how it affected the Jewish people even today. I mean, we see how the enemy has a plan, through that, but God clearly is not surprised by the enemy's plans and how all that ties together. It's a beautiful place to connect the then and now of what God is doing in the world.
And what's really astonishing is that when you combine this reference here in Revelation 2 in the letter to Pergamum with Matthew 12 verses 22 through 26, where Jesus is accused of casting out demons by the power of Beelzebul, or Baal the prince, and he there responds that if Satan casts out demons by his own power, how will his kingdom stand? It's like Baal is Zeus. That's well established by scholars. So Baal, Satan, Zeus, Satan, Jupiter. So essentially, the god of this world, Satan, understood that power was moving west to Greece and Rome throughout history, and we're actually going to be at one of his stopping points as he moved his base of power westward, it seems, to go along with the change, the shift in political power.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, we sometimes read the Bible in terms of what happened 2,000 years ago, or what was Paul writing into, or where some of the places that Jesus walked, and we go to these locations looking back, thinking like, well, that was long ago, and that's what's that's where we're learning as if it's more information. But exactly what you're talking about, if we're able to follow, we're still in biblical times, like the times that we're living in with the restoration of Israel, and how nations are coming against, and how God is using even things like Germany, even things like even the hatred and the evil to accomplish his purposes, or at least allowing that to influence in his master plan. We'll be seeing all of that in Turkey as well, and so it's some really special sites.
We're going to continue our conversation with Doug Hershey about what we will see on the Skywatch TV tour of Turkey. And of course, we'll talk about how you can find out more information and reserve your place, but also want to make you aware of a very special offer. Back in 2019, when Doug visited us at Skywatch TV, it was to promote and celebrate the release of his book, Israel Rising, The Land of Israel Reawakens. And we had the opportunity to discuss his book, but we still have the book at the Skywatch TV store in the warehouse. And so we're making this special offer available to you. And as we're recording this, I can tell you that the number one online bookseller, Amazon, is down to just one copy in their warehouse. We have more than that on hand, and we actually have a better offer. You can get this book that, Doug, how would you describe it? Essentially documents the miraculous blooming, the awakening of Israel since Israel became a nation in 1948?
Yeah, it's 208 pages. It has over 25 locations all through Israel, looking at then and now photography from the exact location. So not just simply a then and now photo book of Israel, but it's paired with Ezekiel 36, which talks about when the Jewish people return, the land will put forth branches, and the land will be cultivated and sown, and waste and forgotten cities will be rebuilt. So it's not just simply a then and now photo book of Israel, kind of like what we're talking about. It's a documentation that this time that we're living in is actually the time that the prophets talked about, and here's your visual evidence. And so it's actually, I think it's going to be a good foundation for anybody that would be joining us in Turkey, just simply to kind of wrap your head around what were the prophets saying, what's happening right now, and what are the things that happened in sort of the first century world that are still affecting us today and that are still unfolding today. I think it'll be a really great foundation for those joining us on the trip.
And I can tell you, this is a beautiful book. Sharon and I have a copy of it at home ourselves, and we've got a special offer on this. For your gift of just $35 plus shipping and handling, you can have a copy of Doug Hershey's book, Israel Rising, for your own. In addition, we will add Terry James' Cauldron, Supernatural Implications of the Current Middle East. Terry James, the man behind RaptureReady.com, prophecy expert, and we'll add a 7-hour audio CD called The Unseen Adversary. This is 7 hours of interviews that I conducted over the years with Dr. Michael S. Heiser, author of The Unseen Realm, Bible expert. We discuss everything from giants in the Bible to the Divine Council to his interest in the UFO phenomenon and what it has to do with biblical theology. All of that for your gift of $35 plus shipping and handling. To find out more and to get your copy, log on to skywatchtvstore.com, skywatchtvstore.com, or call toll-free during regular business hours, 844-750-4985. Doug, as you have traveled around quite a bit, obviously, for your tour company, Ezra Adventures, but also your interest in seeing prophecy unfold. I can tell you that's a powerful experience. We were in Israel. The Lord just worked it out this week. We had set the dates of our 2018 tour, and then President Trump announced he would be relocating the embassy on one of the days that we were there in town. So we were there during that 70th anniversary of Israel's Declaration of Independence and the movement, the transfer of the American embassy to Jerusalem. Was an amazing time to be there. As you have traveled through Israel and Turkey, what are some of the most surprising things that you've seen, or most impactful, powerful things that you've seen?
Exactly what we've been talking about isn't just simply that, prophecy being sort of a pie in the sky, maybe one day we'll figure it out, is that oftentimes when God is speaking prophetically about what is to come, he's telling us what is actually going to come so that when we see it, we'll be ready. And so in terms of Israel and the land coming back to life, and the Jewish people returning from the nations, one of them being Turkey, Turkey in Istanbul will be in Istanbul for a little bit on this trip, but for well over a millennia, Istanbul and different regions in Turkey had been a home for Jewish communities, really up until about 15 or 20 years ago, when there started to be some more anti-Semitic attacks and some more specific places where Jewish families were just saying, we just don't feel safe and it's time to move south, move back home. And so from Istanbul to Tel Aviv, it's only a 2-hour flight. I mean, it's still relatively close, just to give your viewers just an idea of where sort of geography-wise. And the fact is that the things that God talked about in the scriptures is coming to pass. He really is bringing his people back from all over. And, really since the time of Abraham, since the time of the Bible, this Turkey has been really an influential nation. And so when we even go back to talk about the Hittites, there are Hittites all through the Bible. Abraham buys his cave from a Hittite. Uriah, during the time of David and Bathsheba, Uriah was a Hittite. So there are these sort of Hittite, quote unquote, ancient Turks that are all through the scriptures from beginning to end. So it's exciting to see, not only whether you're in Israel or around that Mediterranean basin, just what God has been doing for thousands of years to demonstrate what his character is like.
One of the other sites we'll see is Antakia, which is ancient Antioch, where Christians were first called by that name, and that's within figuratively speaking, a stone's throw of a mountain called Jebel al-Akra, which was the mountain in the ancient world where it was believed that Baal's palace was located. So we'll see another location that was very important to Satan and may even have some spiritual or some prophetic significance. But as we travel around Turkey, I know that I know very little about the country, know very little about what it's like inside Turkey. It does seem that the Turkish government is really trying to develop its archaeological resources. For people who aren't familiar with Turkey or the Turkish people, what's it like there? Are Western tourists appreciated?
Yeah, it's very warm and very inviting. So again, if some of your viewers have been to Israel and versus seeing news reports about Israel, what you find in the land is far more safer and far more secure than perhaps what the news reports say. And so while the Turkish government has been doing some pretty crazy things, most Turks, and in my experience, all Turks that I've run across, very warm, very hospitable, very inviting. And part of what I enjoy about it is that that Turkish culture, it's not Arab and it's not Jewish. It's Turkish. So so things like Turkish delights or Turkish pastries or Turkish towels or things like that, where it's in sort of the old travel style world of top of the line hospitality. A lot of that was based out of Turkish hospitality, and so a lot of that we'll experience not only in the places where we're staying, but some of the locals we'll be interacting with. So it's a very warm, very safe country. I've got good friends that have been living and working there for 20 years or so that are fluent in Turkish, and so we've never had any type of security issues or security problems. And exactly what you said, the Turkish government is spending a lot of time and a lot of money to renovate a lot of these ancient sites, these biblical sites, and they're very warm and welcoming to Western travelers. And so again, I'm excited to take a group and show you around.
Turkish coffee. Let's not forget Turkish coffee.
Turkish coffee, can't beat it.
Ezekiel 38 and 39, as long as we're dealing with Bible prophecy, which is what this show is all about, in fact, all of those nations that are referenced by Ezekiel in chapter 38, the northern coalition, if you will, Meshech and Tubal and Beth Togarmah, all of those are located in the land of Turkey. Why this end times emphasis, both with Ezekiel and the war of Gog and Magog and John with his letters to the churches of Revelation? What is the spiritual significance of Turkey, do you think?
It was really sort of the known civilized world at the time, and so much of where the disciples were going, or where the apostles were going, were into these major population centers. And so whether it was, like we were talking about, whether Ephesus or Pergamum or some of these other major places, this is where much of the world was interacting with. So it'd be the same way today as going to New York City or going to London or Tokyo or something like that. It was one of the prime locations where or even like Athens, if you were there, this is where the world was happening. And so it's also one of the few places, unlike Israel. Like Israel had been desolate for hundreds, if not thousands of years, complete wasteland. That's part of what you see in my book, Israel Rising. But Turkey has been continuously inhabited in the same location for 3,000-4,000 years. Where there's always been a civilization that's been growing and building and thriving, and it's been changing as far as of how it was conquered and who was in charge and that type of thing. But overall, whereas Israel lay desolate for hundreds and almost 1,700-1,800 years, Turkey hasn't been that way. Turkey has always been thriving. There's always been something that's been going on. So again, just as it was written about in the prophets, here they are sort of coming back onto the world stage in terms of some of their alliances and talking about geopolitics, and I'm sure a lot of that stuff we'll talk about on the trip as well. But it's just really amazing to see that God in His foresight was actually very accurate and very clear about what was going to be happening and what we could be looking for and what to expect.
One of the things that we're interested to see, because we've seen this featured in a couple of documentaries now, is the site of ancient Hieropolis. Explain what Hieropolis is and why it was significant in the ancient world.
Yeah, so that's it's actually not far at all. In fact, it's just maybe 4 or 5 miles across the valley from a not so little town at the time called Laodicea. And so Hierapolis was a healing center where these hot springs, these natural hot springs, would come up out of the earth, and today we might know it as either Hierapolis or Pamukkale. And so if you've ever seen Instagram photos of these incredible hot water pools with what looks like snow, but it's not really snow, maybe kind of crystal, that's probably in that whole region right there. But just beautiful natural hot springs. It was a place where the Romans set up a sort of a healing center of sorts. I want to say, just off the top of my head, I want to say it was Thomas, I think, was martyred there, or no, Philip, I think it was. I think it was Philip who was martyred in Hieropolis. Again, one of these major cities that the Lord was sending his apostles out like sheep among wolves. And then literally just right across the other side of the valley, you can see it from Hieropolis. You can see Laodicea, where, of course, we know from one of the letters in Revelation that the Lord was speaking to. But it was also a place where, if you read some of Paul's letters, like in Colossians, he's actually referring to the love that he has for the believers in Laodicea. So it was very active in terms of believers and what God was doing in that area, even in the midst of this Roman paganistic culture and how they all sort of blended together. So again, it's just an amazing, beautiful sight. The last time I was there, this is sort of an aside, and we're not offering this on the trip, but I actually did some parasailing or paragliding over the ruins of Hierapolis, looking down on Pamukkale. It was incredible. So there's just beautiful, beautiful place.
Yeah, Pamukkale is absolutely beautiful. But what surprised us was that in the midst of all this natural beauty, you've got this cave there that was sacred to the god Pluto, or Hades, the Lord of the Dead, because apparently it leaches carbon dioxide out. And so in the ancient world, the priests of Pluto would bring these animals for slaughter, lambs and goats, and they would be overcome by the carbon dioxide because it's heavier than air, keel over, and everybody watching, oh, Pluto is pleased, called the Plutonion, or as we might call it, the gates of hell. And I noticed from recent photos, the government of Turkey's actually erected a big statue of Pluto and Cerberus outside the entrance.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's sort of amazing the things that are happening there as well. It's also connected to that hot spring when Laodicea is probably most known for, I'd rather you either be hot or cold, but
right.
If you're lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth. And in the original language, it's not like an angry spit. It's more of like, you're sick to my stomach. And so in that area, in that region, on two different sides of Laodicea, you have this natural hot springs, which is sulfur, and which you would go to soak in, but you wouldn't drink from it because it was hot springs and it was just awful. And then on the other side, you had a lot of these cold water natural springs. And so he's again making reference to the area and saying, I prefer you either be hot or cold, but if you mix them together, I mean, you try to drink, like, that doesn't even, like, nobody wants that. It's not a hot spring for soaking your aching bones or for whatever medical stuff you got, and it's certainly not for drinking. It's just, like, no one wants that. Like, that's not, I would absolutely spit you out of my mouth, because that's not at all good really for anything. So again, there are things that are in the land, that are in these cities, just like Israel, when Jesus is talking about different parables or Sermon on the Mount, there are specific things that he's referring to geologically or geographically, and the same thing we'll find as well, especially with these 7 churches. It's really amazing. Like, the light bulb will come on for sure.
This is really exciting. Sharon and I have kind of had a wish to go and visit the churches of Revelation, but also some of the archaeological sites in Turkey that are maybe not as well known as the sites that have been excavated over the last century and a half in places like Egypt or ancient Sumer, or certainly Israel, of course. But some of these sites that we've got lined up on this tour in October are absolutely mind-blowing. What are you most looking forward to seeing on the tour in October?
A lot of times when people go to Turkey, they primarily focus on the western side of Turkey, which is where a lot of the 7 churches are. And in the middle of the country is a place called Cappadocia, which is, again, just a gorgeous place. And there were Jews from Cappadocia at Acts 2. And, there's some just beautiful locations. But Turkey is a really sizable country, and even most Turkish nationals don't travel. Like, they'll go to Cappadocia for vacation, but going further east to places like Haran and to some of these profoundly biblical places where biblical Antioch is at. Most Turks really don't go out that far, and it's almost like in as far as like north and south of the eastern United States, you have sort of the northern culture and then the southern culture. It's kind of that way with Turkey as far as east and west. If you're east of Cappadocia on the eastern side, it's just a different culture. There's I got to tell you, the baklava and the pistachios are just unreal out in that part of the world, But most Western trips will stay on the western side, which is where, again, a lot of these, like the churches of Revelation are. And I'm most excited about going east, because not only is it wildly unusual for Western groups to go out that way. It's completely safe, no problem with that. But it's really a whole different world, and we get into really a whole different level of biblical understanding, of unique biblical sites and things that really kind of help tie the Bible together.
We'll see essentially Abraham's hometown of Haran and the beehive houses of Haran. But nearby is the town of Sanliurfa, which got a very long tradition of being the Kasdim of the Bible, of the Chaldees.
Yeah, I've also, again, spent some time there. There's a traditional site referring to Abraham's cave that's there as well. Again, it's sort of it's probably not the location, but it's something that's significant to check out. Some of the most dramatic, mind-blowing mosaics that you've probably ever seen anywhere are in Eastern Turkey. I mean, there are museums that are out that way that some of them will be going to that are just look like they could have been done with like a computer program rather than some guy with like little stones and putting them in the floor. Just almost like 3D images, just amazing. Some of the most stunning mosaics I've ever seen anywhere. And so we'll be looking at some of those cultural aspects from early 1st, 2nd, 3rd century that were really tied in around that time.
Sanliurfa has an archaeological museum, and they've got a number of artifacts there that have been pulled from a couple of sites that are much, much older, that are in that area, including Göbekli Tepe, which archaeologists have called the world's oldest religious center, but another site nearby called Karahan Tepe that is supposed to be even older. What is the significance, the Neolithic era, now we're getting back to like 9,000 BC and older?
Yeah, some of those sites, I mean, one of the most stunning things is that, we're looking at sites where Göbekli Tepe, is, I think, they're dating like 10 to 12,000 years old. And the amazing thing is that, like, I've been to that site and they basically tell you, like, we have no idea what this is. But it's here, and some farmer found it in a field, and now they've dug it out. But there's images of different animals, and there's how it's different set up. I mean, there's sort of guesses of what it could be, but certainly most are agreeing that some type of temple, some type of paganistic ritual experiences that were happening there. But what happened there and what has been happening there, aside from the archaeology today, they're still figuring that out. It's still an ongoing dig. So the same way that I enjoy going to different sites in Israel, like Caesarea Maritime, where there's just a constant ongoing archaeological dig, I'm looking forward to going back to some of these sites to find out, what have they found in the last year since I've been there. And so, again, just some mind-blowing locations there that are just hard to wrap your head around until you're actually standing there.
Well, the thing that's really interesting about that site, and I'll have to ask you for help again, how to pronounce the name?
Oh, man. I've got so much sort of Hebrew thought in my mind. I would say Göbekli Tepe, but I'm not.
Okay.
I think that's probably wrong. My Turkish friends are rolling their eyes right now.
We've got a few months to practice. But
right.
According to a couple of friends of ours who are working on a book on that site, it was what's really significant is that it was developed not as a settlement for agriculture or anything particular. It was designed from the ground up as a religious center, which is what makes it significant. And so we're talking about something that perhaps predates the flood, but certainly has some spiritual significance to it. And so we will be talking about that on the tour. And one of the things, again, that makes those things really special is that whether you call it speculation or wonder or whatever, I mean, exactly what you said. When you're looking at things that potentially predate the flood, and God was saying like he flattened everything because of the evil that was there, like clearly something broke his heart. And here's potentially one of these sites that, whether this was one of the places or whatever, I mean, the people were doing something, and part of the excitement about being there is just sort of the wonder, like what was it about this particular place that just broke the heart of God, where he said, I wish that I had never made man. And so it's just that whole process and kind of speculating. It's sort of so of that unknown is it's definitely one of those places that no one has figured out. And even more mysterious, the fact that it was ritually buried and abandoned, and what was it that caused the people to bury it before they left? And that is again one of those greatest mysteries of all history.
Indeed.
Another site that's really curious and really mysterious is Çatalhöyük, where all of the houses are built so that you have to access them through the roof. And this is another site that we've managed to get onto the tour. What are the theories about this particular location and why these houses were built so you had to climb to the roof to get inside?
That's actually, it's funny you bring that up. That's one of the sites that I haven't been to. So that one's new for me that you guys added onto the group, and some of my admin people who are well versed in Turkey, they were like, nobody goes here. This is going to be amazing. They were getting excited about it.
Wow.
So for me, I've been reading about it and just kind of getting caught up on it as well. So I can't wait to be there myself.
The sites we talked about in our program for Unraveling Revelation, the city of Ephesus and its significance both historically and prophetically. It's the first church of the seven that Jesus dictated a letter to John the Revelator. Of course, Paul spent some time there, wrote a very famous letter, a letter that really is all about spiritual warfare when you read it all together in context. What moves you or what strikes you when you're at Ephesus?
One of the things that has just gripped me probably the first time I was there is just the size. It's just the overwhelming size, and of all of the things that was going on, the amount of people that were living there. We talked about Ephesus being sort of a spiritual Disneyland of sorts. The amount of temples that were there. That nearby was a local healing center, so people were coming to Ephesus and coming to the temples, which then turned into sort of hospitals, where if the local medical schools that were being formed couldn't help you, they would send you to the temples that maybe the gods would have mercy on you. And so a lot of these places, again, when we're talking about tying into some of the miracles and some of the things that happened in the book of Acts, when people are getting healed in Ephesus, it's directly an affront really to some of the gods that were there. And so it's a site where at the time that there was more sorcery, and so many of the believers that came out of that world were burning sorcery books and were breaking spells and that type of thing. So all of these things that sort of that whole what we know about spiritual warfare and how we go to Ephesus or to Ephesians for that is directly related to that culture. And so again, it's for me, I guess there isn't a particular place in Ephesus, just the overall size. And so when Jesus is saying to his apostles, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves, when you get to those cities and you stand around and understand an aspect of that culture, you can go, okay, well, I could see how some smelly Galilean fishermen might step into a culture like that and feel completely overwhelmed. And just being completely like, I'm sending you, just in a completely different culture that the only thing you have to depend on will be me. And that was really how, by the demonstration of power and by miracles is how the early church grew. And so you can see some of that context. So for me, whether it's Ephesus or Pergamum or some of these other, early New Testament sites, that's what's most striking to me is just the overall size and how ritualistic and paganistic it was, and yet that was the location that the Lord chose to really bring life to really not only those locations, but still us today.
Speaking of large and paganistic, Mount Nemrut, which was a site, if I remember correctly, 2nd century BC, I think, maybe a little
That's
earlier
correct.
than that. A king, this is in Cappadocia, am I right?
No, that's actually out further out east. So not far from, I want to say out more towards Haran. So eastern Turkey.
Okay. A mountain site where a king decreed that when he passed, he would be buried under this cairn, this just giant pyramidal cairn, so that you will never, ever get to his body, because as you dig in, the rock that's piled on top will cave in. But these giant heads, these giant idols representing the gods that he worshipped, and apparently he was trying to syncretize Greek religion with the Persian religion at the time, but these stone idols on Mount Nemrut have been preserved for a couple thousand years and are just absolutely stunning. Yeah,
that place is stunning, and what's shocking about it is that it's up on a mountain and there's nothing around. Like when we drive to that location, probably what will be the most shocking is just the journey getting there, because there's no civilization around. It's in the middle of nowhere. And so you can imagine, 2nd century BC, the amount of slaves that are carrying rocks up to, up on top to, to make this tumulus, and some of the heads that are on the ground now used to be up on larger statues. It's probably one of the most stunning, one of the most stunning places in Turkey for me, as far as like off the beaten path. And of course, when we're there and we're talking about, exactly some of what you just talked about, of what he was trying to do and what the goals were. He even was trying to set up, an annual celebration, paganistic feast that were supposed to happen at that location that would blend a bunch of, things together. And it was, there were curses get connected to it, that if you didn't do it, curses. I mean, it's just, it's a site that is truly unique, and so I'm looking forward just to getting some groups up there, because I guarantee it's like stuff that you've never seen before.
It's the kingdom of Commagene, I remember now.
That's right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Commagene. I got it confused with Cappadocia. Well, speaking of stunning, the book Israel Rising, released in 2019. We had the pleasure of hosting Doug at Skywatch TV back then when he was on tour for the book, and discussed it then. And as we realized we were putting this tour together, I had our crack staff at the Skywatch TV store, Penny Dutton and her team, looked and found we still have some copies of the book there, which is good, because as of this recording, if you go to the big online bookseller, they're down to 1 copy. Now, I'm sure they'll get more, but we can offer you a very special package, Israel Rising. Doug, again, how would you describe this, the before and after photos showing Israel then and then Israel now?
Yeah, so Israel Rising is sort of a coffee table style book, 208 pages. There's over 25 locations all through Israel where we've taken old photos from the 1800s, early 1900s, and gone back to those exact locations to reshoot the angle to show how much the land has revived under Israeli sovereignty. And so Israel Rising isn't just simply a then and now photo book as much as it is about documenting biblical prophecy. So Ezekiel 36 talks about when the Jewish people are out of the land will be forgotten, and it'll be a wasteland and not really claimed by anyone. It'll be a mockery of the nations. When the Jewish people return, the branches will put forth fruit, the land will be cultivated and sown, waste and forgotten cities will be rebuilt. And so a lot of the photography, all of the photography really was done with the intention of showing this land is being revived in a way that has never happened before since the time of Ezekiel spoke about it. And so that's some of what it is. We talk about it as a visual documentation that God is fulfilling his word.
That's I love the slug line on the cover. Ancient Prophecy, Modern Lens. Israel Rising by Doug Hershey. It can be yours for your gift of $35 and plus shipping and handling. But when you get that, we will also include the Terry James book, Cauldron, Supernatural Implications of the Current Middle East. Terry James, prophecy expert, longtime publisher of RaptureReady.com. And we'll add the 7-hour audio CD, 7 hours of interviews I've conducted over the years with Dr. Michael Heiser, recognized, renowned Bible scholar. You'll get all of that for your gift of $35 plus shipping and handling. Get more. You can find out more and order your copy now at skywatchtvstore.com, skywatchtvstore.com, or by calling us at 844-750-4985. That's a toll-free call, 844-750-4985. Doug, one of the more fascinating sites on the tour of Turkey in October is the underground city of Darin, Cuyu. We knew about some of these underground cities, but you put this one on the tour and said it's got some special significance.
Yeah, we had actually had there's several really fascinating underground cities that are around the Cappadocia area in central Turkey, and I actually wanted to plug this one in instead because there's 2 aspects of this underground city that is truly unique that I've never seen anywhere else in Turkey, really anywhere else in the world. And 2 things. One, that it has an early church dating back to the 2nd century that is built in the shape of a cross. And so while we know about that, even from the Byzantine era, we know about that they would build, these early churches in the shape of a cross. Of course, none of them are standing, but this one, because it's an underground city, you can actually be in a place inside the building, which is probably 70, 80 feet below the surface, in a location where 1st and 2nd century believers were praying. And it was built specifically for that reason. Now, what's also amazing is in that same city, the first time I was there, our Turkish guide took us over and took us into this other room. And as we came in there, she described this thing over here to the left as a fountain, or maybe a baptismal pool. And as we entered the room, at the front of the room, there were 7 steps that went up to a little platform. And she was describing it to us as a missionary school, probably from like the 1st or 2nd century. And I, of course, having my history in Israel and Jewish foundations of the New Covenant, I was explaining to her and saying, like, this is not a missionary school. This is a synagogue. Like, this right here. This is a mikveh. Here are the 7 steps that go down. This is how the water would come in. There are 7 steps up to the bima at the front where the rabbi or the teacher would teach. And so I began, actually, in a very kind sort of way, explaining to our very well educated Turkish guide that this wasn't about like Christian missionaries. This is about Jewish people having a Knesset, having a synagogue, having a place to meet. And so, to me, what's really special about that is that in the book of Acts, in Acts 2, one of the locations that was present at Shavuot or Pentecost were Jews coming from Cappadocia, which is where this area is at. And so, then beyond that, there are some of the 3,000 that say, brothers, what should we do? They of course then go home. Peter clearly keeps some type of relationship or communication with them, because Peter's first letter is written to the Jews in Cappadocia. And so as he's writing his letters, maybe the second or third, again, maybe, this is sort of speculation, but here you have an underground synagogue and a church dating back to probably the 2nd century. And Peter writing his letters to Jews in Cappadocia, was this one of the places that maybe his letters were written? Was that the place or not? Who knows? But the chances are that the believers who were there, local believers, certainly probably knew about his writings, whether it was from 100 years before or whatever. So again, there's some really profound biblical treasures that directly connect into the book of Acts, into the things that Peter was explaining and teaching about. And so this is one of the sites for me that was really special. You can pray inside a 2nd century church where early believers did, and we'll spend a little bit of time again praying and maybe even reading some of these portions of 1 Peter, potentially in a synagogue from that same era, where potentially some of these original letters were written. Again, we can't say for sure, but there's some probable aspects to it. It's exciting to be there.
Yeah, we saw this featured on a BBC documentary not long ago, and Sharon and I both got very excited. It's like, we're going there. We're going there.
It is pretty special. And groups that I've taken before, they've told me just to be in a place where you can pray inside a place where the believers less than 100 years separated from some of the apostles or some of the disciples of some of the apostles. Again, sort of, kind of dating back, hearing some of the stories, hearing the personal accounts of what the apostles' life was like with the master. I mean, some of those stories and some of those conversations could have been in some of these locations. And so to be able to spend some time praying there, knowing that, early church brethren of 1900 years ago, we're doing the same thing. It's really moving. It's really special. And so it's one of the spots I'm looking forward to taking our group.
Absolutely. I've seen some video taken from inside, other than the BBC documentary, and we'll be featuring some of that, over the course of this conversation. But it's absolutely stunning to think that much work was put into the city, which, as I understand it, could hold between 20 and 30,000 people, depending on who's doing the estimation.
Yeah, I mean again, these are not just two random buildings down in the underground somewhere. Exactly what you said. It's a maze of caves that held places for livestock, that held granaries, that held places for wineries, that wine was being made there. I mean, it was a complete underground city, and clearly not all of it is completely excavated. But there are just places where there's just levels of this city that are just. Like at some point, like you don't even know how deep you are underground, and just to think about the type of workmanship that it took to get all of these out, and our guides are talking about over here was potentially a kitchen, and this is where one of the families would stay. I mean, it's just it's really amazing, and even more so of like why some of those cities were even made, and why, to protect themselves from invading armies, whether it was the Romans or others throughout history. Just stunning. Again, it's something I haven't seen anywhere else in the world. Quite like that.
That's the thing that really struck me, because when you've got that many people who are hiding underground, it's not because they prefer living out of the sun. It's because
That's right.
They have a desperate need to get away from something on the surface that is threatening them. And when you think about that, and then think about the significance of the religious use, the rooms designed specifically for worship inside that refuge, and think, okay, what would motivate you to dig that in a world that's lit only by torchlight, and live your entire existence down there? That is going to be something I'll remember for a very long time.
And again, it's, for me, one of the special aspects is, when you go to Israel, of course, you get on a boat on the Sea of Galilee, and you read through the Gospels, and you read where some of these locations happened. Turkey is very much like that through the New Covenant. So whether Paul's first and second, third missionary journeys, most of that goes through the nation of Turkey, and so we'll be going to some of those locations. So I like to describe, if you've been to Israel and you've seen where the Lord has walked, and you see the history of Israel, then take the next step. This was never intended to be a Jewish thing. This was something it's one of the first places where the Great Commission they were commissioned out to. It was going into Asia Minor, which was a lot of Turkey. And so you can see like how that grew from these Jewish boys wandering out into Asia Minor to what it's become today in that journey. And again, to be able to tie all of those pieces together, in the book of Acts, and much of those letters are directly connected to a lot of the places that we'll be at, like some of the, whether it's the underground city or the 7 churches in Revelation. There's just some really profound lessons to be learned. Just really special to connect with with first and second century believers, for sure.
Amen. Amen. If you're interested, don't wait, because we're trying to keep this to a relatively manageable size. We're hoping 24 in that vicinity, but the interest early on has been very strong. You can find out more online, skywatchinturkey.com, skywatchinturkey.com, or point the camera on your smartphone or tablet at the QR code on your screen. Doug, with just about a minute and a half to go, for people not familiar with Turkey, what is travel like in Turkey for Westerners?
I describe it the same way I do with Israel. If you want to go to Israel, stop watching the news, because in Israel it's much safer than what you see on TV. The Turkish government is doing some silly things that are raising concerns, but every Turkish community that I've been in, and a couple times now, I've got good friends in different parts of the country. Completely warm, completely hospitable. I've never had an issue with safety or even a concern of it. I've got friends that have lived there for 15, 20 years that are Westerners living in Turkey that have been completely safe. And more so, the Turkish government is starting to spend more and more money on renovating and excavating a lot of these biblical sites with the intention of welcoming Western tourists, Westerners coming to find some of the foundational locations found in the scriptures. And so it's been nothing but warm. The Turkish coffee is amazing. The baklava is like you've never tasted before. And so I can't wait to get back. This is a trip for me that I'm looking forward to being on, just of how unique it is and how exciting that some of these locations are going to be. So join Sharon and me and author Doug Hershey in Turkey this fall, skywatchinturkey.com. Doug, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in Istanbul. Sounds great. I look forward to seeing you. Doug's website is doughershey.co. That is not a misprint or a typo. That is doughershey.co. And again, if you want to get a copy of the book, Israel Rising, Skywatch TV has them in stock. We put them in the inventory back in 2019 when he was on tour, and there are a number of copies left. And so take advantage of it, because the deal that we can offer you on Doug's book is better. I say we, Skywatch TV can offer, is better than what you can get at Amazon. So take advantage of it. It's really a great way of showing people the miraculous blooming of the land and the fulfillment of Bible prophecy in, since Israel became a nation in 1948. Coming up, we're going to talk about what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, an odd religious aspect to this that you may not have heard in an incident that took place last week on the Black Sea. And
well, just a number of other things. This is really, really a mess. That, and we'll tell you more about the new mobile app, the new app from Gilbert House as A View from the Bunker continues. Talking the walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online at VFTB.net. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, youtube.com/Gilbert House. You might have noticed the channel's URL has changed. It is now youtube.com/Gilbert House. Please subscribe and share that link around with your friends. You can also watch this now on our new mobile app, GHTV. That's that little logo you see in the bottom right corner there. Gilbert House TV. As we realized, we're producing about 2.5 hours of video content every week. It would be helpful, we thought, to put it all together in one mobile app, so we have paid a company to put that together for us. It's easy to navigate, looks clean. Sharon did all the graphics on this, so credit to her for making graphics that really looks at... She's the logo back there, too. Really, really a gift. Anyway, it will, again, eventually be available for Android devices, Amazon Kindle Fire tablets, as well as Roku. Right now available for iOS devices and also Apple TV. So if you want to put us on the big screen without having to cast us from a mobile device, you can do that right now at Apple TV, but will soon be available on Roku as well. We'll keep you posted as to the progress on that app. The app also has upcoming events and kind of cool. It's got an audio Bible in there, too, which is really neat, with about 7 different translations, including the NIV, the ESV, the New Living Translation, and a number of others. So, yeah, really, really impressed with this little deal here. There we go. Now let's focus on it. So, anyway, GHTV, Gilbert House Television. You find the app in the App Store, soon coming to the Google Play Store, and also to Roku. Things that are happening in the world today are enough to, if you didn't have a Christian or a biblical worldview, to really fill you with dread, distress. On Wednesday of this past week, Russia tested a new intercontinental ballistic missile, the RS-28 Sarmat. It's nicknamed the Satan II by Western observers, the Satan II. Very clearly a message for the West. Vladimir Putin said that this will give food for thought to those who try to threaten Russia. Why? Because this missile can fly 6,000 miles at hypersonic speed and carry 15 warheads. And according to what I've read, these warheads, nuclear of course, has the potential to destroy an area the size of France or Texas, which means basically the eastern seaboard of the United States. Everything from Boston to Washington, D.C., if one of these hit. It's, with the, what are they called? MIRV, multiple independently targeted reentry vehicles. Anyway, 15 separate warheads that would split from this rocket. It launched on Wednesday from the Plesetsk Cosmodrome in the north of the country, successfully flew to Kamchatka, which is 3,600 miles. It's got a range of about 6,000 miles. And again, this is one of these things that when I was a kid, I'm just old enough to remember the tail end of the Cold War, where we had the radiation zones or the radiation shelters in the elementary school I attended. That yellow sign with the 3 triangles in it. We were supposed to go to an area if we got nuked in Chicago. We were supposed to go hide there. Old enough now to realize that was just foolish. But that was a thing that kids in the 50s and 60s grew up with. So I was born in the early 60s. So again, I remember the tail end of that, but that's not something that recent generations have had to deal with. And now this is back again because the West, NATO, United States, United Kingdom, keep poking the bear. I'm not defending Vladimir Putin. I mean, but, you know, it's hard to imagine the United States showing the kind of tolerance, showing any tolerance for foreign nations coming in and interfering in Mexico, for example, wanting Mexico to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or whatever they call it, basically signing a defense pact with China. It just wouldn't happen. It would not be allowed. And yet this is what NATO is trying to do in Ukraine. And, you know, Russia is very much aware that they were invaded twice through Ukraine in the 20th century. World War I, World War II. That was the path that the Germans took to drive into the heart of Russia, was through Ukraine. So it is really an awful situation. There was a Swiss intelligence, veteran intelligence officer who's also served with NATO and at the UN, Jacques Baud, B-A-U-D, interviewed earlier this week, who said that the reason negotiations failed back in January and February, when all of these high-level talks were taking place to try to prevent Russia from invading Ukraine, is that the West deliberately torpedoed the negotiations. They didn't want a deal reached. And Baud, he has said, until the end of January, nobody thought Putin was actually going to invade. But then on or about February 16th, which is about a week before Russia invaded, that took place on the 24th, the shelling of the eastern provinces, the Donetsk region, or the Donbass, specifically in Donetsk, where the Ukrainian government had been shelling the pro-Russian separatists in the east, they stepped up the shelling by a factor of about 30, according to Baud. And that was the signal to Putin that Ukraine was about to roll into the Donbass to physically take it back. So rather than allow that and allow these very anti-Russian heavy armored units on its border, Putin said that decided to move first. Now, again, that's not to defend what's going on there, because you've got 4.7 million people, last time I looked, who've been displaced from their homes, thousands upon thousands who've been killed or wounded, untold millions, if not billions of dollars worth of damage that's taken place in Ukraine. But it appears that the whole purpose of this, and this was actually kind of admitted to by a Biden administration official in the New York Times a few weeks ago, that the purpose was to draw Russia into a quagmire, draw them into an extended conflict in Ukraine to weaken the Putin regime. In other words, according to this intelligence officer, Jacques Baud, the West, NATO, United States, United Kingdom, made a decision to sacrifice Ukraine to weaken Russia. Now, this is horrible that there are people who would even think this way, because Russia and Ukraine combined for about 15% of the world's wheat. They supply about 25% of the world's wheat exports. And there are countries in the Middle East and Africa that depend on food exports from Russia and Ukraine especially to feed their people, to keep their people from literally starving to death. Lebanon, 87% of their grain imports come from Ukraine. But right now, there's nothing leaving ports in Odessa because too dangerous. Got mines in the Black Sea. There's some evidence that the mines that are floating free in the Black Sea right now were deliberately set loose so that NATO could come along and said, you need our minesweepers to come in. Now, Turkey said, no, that's not happening. You're not coming through. We're going to abide by the Montreux Agreement, which basically closes the Black Sea to warships of nations that don't have a Black Sea presence. So, but it is horrible that the people on the ground in Ukraine and Russia, and by extension, when these ripples start spreading across the pond, places like Lebanon and Kenya and Morocco, a number of other nations that depend heavily on Tunisia, that depend heavily on exported wheat from Ukraine, are going to be struggling to feed their people. Here in the United States, we're going to see our food prices spike. Farmers are already saying, look, I'm planting a lot less corn this year because it's fertilizer intensive, and the cost of fertilizer has tripled or quadrupled because we can't get fertilizer from Russia or Belarus, major suppliers of fertilizer. So rather than spend all this money on fertilizer, we're just going to plant more soybeans. But here in America, we're probably still going to be able to get bread. We won't like the price of it, but we'll still be able to get it. Same may not be true for people in Africa and the Middle East. And that leads to political instability. When you get people who are desperately hungry, they tend to do desperate things. So we are living in prophetic times. And I just pray that the Lord returns sooner rather than later. It also came out this week, by the way, that Canada, about 18 months ago, trained soldiers from Ukraine, which, by the way, is going on here in the U.S. as well. We're supplying those Switchblade kamikaze drones and howitzers now. And the Ukrainian troops, according to Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, is those soldiers operating those devices are being trained in places like Biloxi, Mississippi. It was announced on Tuesday this week that Ukraine's get some new fighter jets supplied by somebody, not sure who. John Kirby, Pentagon spokesperson, very cleverly said, well, we didn't transport any whole aircraft. Is that a legal distinction? We didn't ship them the whole plane. We just shipped them parts that they needed to fix the planes that they've been flying against the Russia. I think this is a legal distinction that the Kremlin will not recognize. You understand that we are right at the line of crossing over into open warfare with Russia. And in fact, there are some Democrats who are now calling on the Biden administration to do that, to send soldiers into Ukraine. Senator Chris Coons on CBS Face the Nation last Sunday openly said the Biden administration, the president needs to commit American soldiers. But as it is, we're training Ukrainian soldiers here on American soil. The Brits, the SAS, their special forces, training Ukrainians in Kyiv. So they're actually in country. Canada, 18 months ago, training members of the Azov Battalion. That's that neo-Nazi group that was very active in the Donbass. Members of the Azov Battalion now hold up at the Azovstal Ironworks in Mariupol. Interesting that Western media was openly describing the Azov Battalion as a neo-Nazi organization until it came time for them to fight Russians. And now the media is making all kinds of excuses. Yeah, they're not really Nazis. They just wear Nazi insignia. Well, it was also disclosed this week that the Wuhan Institute of Virology had a memorandum of understanding with the University of Texas, Galveston National Laboratory. That's the University of Texas medical branch. This memorandum of understanding said that the Wuhan lab and the Galveston National Laboratory, either party could ask the other to completely destroy documents. Shred all the documents, erase all the files, destroy all the backups. They entered into a partnership back in 2018. This memorandum of understanding extends beyond the end of their 5-year term, which ends in October of this year, October of 2022. So not only does this raise questions about how transparent the Wuhan Institute of Virology has been, it also raises some legal red flags for the University of Texas, because not only do private entities have internal records, retention, and destruction policies, but as a public organization, a public institution that's taking taxpayer dollars, Texas faces a higher standard under laws intended to safeguard the use of federal and state tax money. interesting little revelation this week, along with some documents obtained by the Canadian news organization Rebel News. Ezra Levant and his group, they obtained some documents through Access to Information filings. I guess that's Freedom of Information Act in Canada. Access to Information filings found that the then Minister of Global Affairs, Chrystia Freeland, described Canada's plan to use COVID-19 as leverage to comply with the goals of the World Economic Forum. In other words, hashtag Great Reset. They had a meeting back in December of 2020. Chrystia Freeland had been invited to serve as co-chair of this meeting. And according to the documents obtained by Rebel News, the meeting was, quote, intended to finalize and agree upon a set of principles for global cooperation created by the World Economic Forum. Freeland had been asked to lead the conversation on the first of these principles, which was to strengthen global cooperation. But here's the key. The document indicated that COVID recovery was considered not an end in itself, but a means to an end, that end being the World Economic Forum's goal of a more equitable and sustainable world. In other words, hashtag Great Reset. It's not a conspiracy theory. In fact, in an op-ed piece for the National Post, which is the mainstream newspaper, economic and international relations expert Rupa Subramanya wrote that Chrystia Freeland's side gig with the WEF is endangering Canadian democracy. There's no need to invent conspiracy theories. The attempt by global elites to subvert local democracy is fully on and in plain view. End quote. Indeed, it is. Again, these are really, really interesting times. And again, all we can say is come quickly, Lord, because the way things are going, we're just not going to have much of a world left here very much longer. But, you know, when we see these things happening, Scripture tells us, look up because our redemption draws near. And that's good news. That's good news. Remember, Psalm 2, when these things start happening and you really start getting distressed about them, remember, the Lord looks down. Let me bring up the verse because it is really a comfort. When you feel like you want to throw things at your television screen, when you're seeing the news each day, or when you're reading these headlines and just astonished that there are people out there who would think or behave in such a way, to use other human beings as pawns in a game that in their minds has no more consequences than a game of Risk. Just remember Psalm 2. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together. Take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, his Moshiach, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. The Lord looks down on them and laughs and holds them in derision. And these fools at the World Economic Forum, the UN, Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, they think they run the world. They are sadly misinformed. Pray for them that they will see the truth before it's too late. We've got a few things coming up to tell you about. Just a couple of weeks away from Skywatch TV's Defender Conference, the unveiling. This is a virtual conference available for 90 days, all presentations. Basically, you set the schedule. You watch the presentations on your schedule. And I just learned as of today, as of this recording, we're going to add, or Tom Horn, per his direction, is adding in the Skywatch Films documentaries as bonus content for the unveiling. So, in other words, The Great Delusion, Belly of the Beast, Inhuman, America's Secret Destiny, those will all be available as well as the more than 24 presentations from the likes of Tom Horn, Rabbi Jonathan Kahn, Dr. Ken Johnson, Dr. Michael Lake, Pastor Carl Gallups, Joel Richardson, many others. So take advantage of this. You'll find out more online, and you can register at defenderconference.com, defenderconference.com. Then we will be traveling in just about a month. Sharon and I looking forward to a Prophecy Watchers conference. It's been a couple of years since we've attended one of those, and that, it's been 5 years, I think, since the last Prophecy Watchers conference we attended in Colorado. This will be at the Colorado Springs Marriott, where they used to hold them every year, and if you're interested in end times prophecy, this is a place to go. Gary Stearman, Mondo Gonzalez from Prophecy Watchers will be there, of course. L.A. Marzulli, Ken Johnson, Ryan Pitterson, Dr. Tommy Ice, Tom Hughes, Larry Allison, Nathan Jones, Dr. Randall Price, Brent Miller Jr., Aaron Lipkin will be there as well. Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Bill Salas, Brandon Holthouse, and Sharon and I will be there as well. I'll be giving 2 presentations in Colorado Springs, so hope we can see you there. You can find out more and reserve your place at prophecywatchers.com. I believe there will be streaming video, but you can find that out at their website, prophecywatchers.com. In July, the Go Therefore Conference, this will be in the Dayton, Ohio area. The Harvest Revival Center, great lineup for this conference. Pastor Mike Spalding, Pastor Carl Gallups, Dr. Michael Lake, David Hevner, Pastor Casper McLeod, Coach Dave Daubenmeyer, Kenny C. will be there speaking at a conference, and we're looking forward to that. Tom Dunn, Neil Peterson, and of course Sharon and I, and hopefully you'll take advantage of this one as well. If you're in the Midwest anywhere, come on out, Brookville, Ohio, just west of Dayton, the Harvest Revival Center. Find out more online, gothereforeconference.com, gothereforeconference.com. Spent the first part of this program already telling you about the tour of Turkey, the tour of Israel, March 19th through 30th of 2023. Sharon and I, along with Messianic Rabbi Zev Poret and our colleagues from Skywatch TV, Ali Henson and Donna Howell, this a great, great tour because we go places in Israel that other tours don't, like Joshua's altar, Gilgal Rephaim, Shiloh, and of course the places you want to see as well, like Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount, and Nazareth, Capernaum, the Sea of Galilee, many other sites. Don't miss this. And then if you take the optional 3-day extension over to Jordan, we'll show you what Moses saw when he got his only look at the Holy Land. It is a life-changing thing. The Bible comes alive when you're there in the land. Skywatchinisrael.com is the website, or use the QR code on your screen. Thank you for taking time to watch us, and we appreciate if you give us a review at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, YouTube, wherever else you find us, which is, of course, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Our announcer is D.C. Good. And A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We do this because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.